Welcome to a place where we combine equal parts science, technology, design, and entrepreneurship. Then we gradually stir in magic to the mixture, and you have the Perception Podcast.
Join us in conversations with design heroes, inspirational thinkers, business leaders, and trailblazers across the globe.
Today on the Perception Podcast is David Kirby. David Kirby is chair of the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies in the Liberal Arts and director of the Science, Technology, and Society program at Cal Poly University in San Luis Obispo. He was a practicing evolutionary geneticist before leaving bench science to explore science communication through entertainment media. His experiences as a member of the scientific community have informed his internationally recognized studies into the interactions between science, technology, and fiction. His book, Lab Coats in Hollywood, Science, Scientists, and Cinema, examines the historic collaborations between science consultants and the entertainment industry. He is currently writing a book titled Indecent Science, Religion, Science, and Movie Censorship, which will explore how movies served as a battleground over science's role in influencing morality. So let's take a deep dive into the science of sci-fi cinema with David Kirby. David Kirby, welcome to the Perception Podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to be here.
So why don't we get started with a little bit of your backstory? Maybe you can give us some of your history and how you ended up at Cal Poly University.
Yeah, well, I have I think a somewhat interesting background in that I got my PhD in the field of molecular evolutionary genetics, so a hard science, a bench science, and I was teaching at American University in Washington, D.C. for a while, and, loved science, but wasn't too fond of doing science any longer. So I decided to switch fields, and the National Science Foundation has some grants for scientists to switch out of the hard sciences into either humanities, social science type research. I was very interested in media and science and that intersection. So then I went to Cornell to do this retraining postdoc. And there I got interested in, science communication, but science communication through entertainment media. So, the ways in which science is communicated through movies, television, video games. And really what I wanted to do, sort of my goal, was to, take the idea of science communicated through entertainment media seriously, right? Not just through sort of depictions and things like that, but that it can actually be communicated. Finished my postdoc there and got a job over in Europe, in Manchester, UK, at the University of Manchester for 15 years. Wrote my book, Lab Coats in Hollywood there. Working in Europe, great in many ways, but saw an opportunity to come back home when someone from Cal Poly contacted me and said, "Hey, do you want to be chair of this brand new department we have of interdisciplinary studies?" And so I thought that was a great opportunity. Got to move back to where family lives. That's how I ended up there.
Awesome. So how did you first become interested in the intersection of science and cinema?
Well, when I was at American University, a movie came out called Gattaca, where Gattaca was about a sort of future world where your genetics sort of determined, what it was that you could do in the world. So genetic engineering of humans had become a reality. And so people's places in society were dictated by their genomes. And, since I was an evolutionary geneticist by training and, I'd been teaching about that sort of notion of human genetic engineering and eugenics, I wrote a couple of articles about that sort of overlap, that intersection. And in particular, one of the articles I wrote was sort of a bioethics exploration of Gattaca, showing how it addressed specific bioethical concerns with human genetic engineering. And ultimately, what I found with Gattaca was, the film wasn't saying that the technology was bad or wrong. It was really, if we took the underlying sort of ideology of genetic determinism as true. That was the problem. And that sort of, whet my beak a little bit for this sort of science cinema type of analysis, especially from a science communication perspective. And I thought, well, if I want to do this seriously, I better get some training, in the methods of, both film analysis and some of the more sociological elements.
So just to go back to, I guess, your younger years, did you grow up a sci-fi fan? Were you into movies, comic books? Give us a little bit
Oh yeah,
about your
loved
childhood, I guess.
yeah, loved movies. I mean, this is one of the major reasons why I made that switch. When I switched from the bench science to doing the more science communication, science and technology studies work, everyone was like, well, why don't you do a project that's based on what genetics, that sort of thing. But I loved movies, always loved movies. And so I really wanted to do something associated with movies and figured if I'm making this switch, I'm going to be doing what I want to do. So yeah, growing up as a kid, I loved science fiction stories, not novels, but also science fiction movies and especially horror movies. Especially those sort of B horror movies of the 50s. Mm-hmm. And growing up as a kid in Chicago, on Saturdays, you had, Master Horror Thriller Theater, with the host Son of Svengoolie. So me and my brothers on Saturday afternoons, we'd watch those horror movies together. And so, yeah, having an opportunity to do something movie related was kind of a dream come true.
Nice. So in your book, you discuss how scientists have been portrayed in movies throughout history. What are some of the most common stereotypes that you've noticed?
Yeah, it's funny. You have changing stereotypes over the course of the history of science and movies. So, the sort of traditional stereotype is the mad scientist, right? The scientist who's, trying to seek knowledge with a sort of tinge of evil, right? They're willing to do anything to get that knowledge. You're not sure what they'll do with that knowledge once they get it. But that stereotype is really more of one from sort of the early days of Hollywood cinema, something you see in the 30s and the 40s. Going into the 50s and the 60s, you get a new type of stereotype, sort of nutty professor type, right? That's exemplified by the film, The Nutty Professor, sort of a scientist who is very smart, but they don't have the sort of social skills that most people have, right? It's also tied into a stereotype like the absent-minded professor, right? The scientist who's so they're thinking all the time about science, and so they don't forget to put their pants on, right? That type of thing. So you get a lot of that, happening in the 50s and the 60s. You also in the 60s get what's referred to as sort of the amoral scientist, right? Sort of emerging out of the Manhattan Project, the scientist who is not good, is not bad, but just wants to know. So the scientist who, understanding that, hey, setting off an atomic bomb might actually destroy the entire world, but they just want to know, will it work? So you get that type of scientist. The most recent, so the newest scientist stereotype is the idea of the nerd, right? So most people don't, realize that the nerd as a character, it only emerges in the 1980s, right? This sort of based on sort of computer scientist, the geek in the basement, always working on the computer, also lacks sort of social skills. But the most common stereotype actually that you get nowadays in movies is the hero scientist. So the scientist who is not just intellectually superior, but often also physically superior to everyone else. The scientist can solve lots of problems on the screen. In some ways, well, in many ways, that's actually a good change for scientists, but it's also still a stereotype, and it can actually cause problems of its own, right? If people have a view of science that it's infallible. That's actually not a good thing, as we saw with the COVID pandemic, right? People expecting scientists to know the answers instantly. And if, you know, as the scientific process moves along, you get things wrong, you're blaming scientists for having the wrong answers.
So what do you think is the most accurate or realistic portrayal of science that you have seen in a movie? What are some of the movies that you think get it right?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'm always an advocate of the movie Contact. It's based on the Carl Sagan novel with Jodie Foster. And what I like about it, I mean, you know, again, going back to a little bit of this, you know, she's kind of a super scientist in many ways, but she does have some flaws, and it also shows the sort of problems that real scientists have when they're, you know, trying to make discoveries. There was a recent film called Arrival that I also really love. Again, showing you know, the different ways in which we can try and find knowledge. And I especially love the way in which the movie, you know, ties in its sort of notions of linguistics and physics together to the drama itself, right? That it's about notions of memories and the past, and would we want to relive the past if we could, or change things. So there's certainly that, but you know, if you look at the last 7-8 years, those space films, Interstellar, The Martian, Gravity, all have a lot of accurate science, especially The Martian and Interstellar. All three of those films had scientific support, but The Martian and Interstellar had mega scientific support. And so, you know, that really does show on the screen.
So how do you think the advancements in technology and special effects have changed the way science is depicted in movies over time?
Yeah, you know, when I started writing the book and thinking about scientists working as consultants, I mean, one of the things I sort of identified is what I call the sort of post-Jurassic Park phenomena. That Jurassic Park was amazingly successful as a movie. And, you know, Hollywood's a copycat culture. And so, you know, filmmakers are like, well, how do we tap into that? And one of the things that made it successful was its realism. But it actually had two types of realism, right? It had the technological realism, right? Those dinosaurs, you know, they looked real, or as we would say, perceptually real. But it also had a scientific realism, right? Steven Spielberg brought in a lot of paleontologists to help with the ways in which the dinosaurs would move and act, and talking about their behavior. And so when filmmakers went to replicate it, you know, they couldn't tear the two apart. They sort of conflated the scientific realism with the technical realism. And so the more that technologies got real, the more they wanted the science in the movies to be equally real. And also, you know, as technology got better, audiences, you know, they're sophisticated. I mean, we often, you know, look at some dumb blockbusters and say, oh God, audiences want the stupidest things, but they're actually pretty sophisticated. And so, you know, they want their stories to be as real as the images. So you get the rise of a sort of real science realism throughout the 2000s, you know, up till today, that, you know, was needed to match the realism of the images they saw on screen.
One of my favorite visionaries in television history is Kenneth Johnson, and I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but you know his shows. He was responsible for $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman, and of course the greatest show ever, The Incredible Hulk, with Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno. He then went on to do V and Alienation and so forth. But he always tells a story when he was coming up. George Burns, the famous comedian, told him that if you're going to tell a lie, make sure you're surrounded with as much truth as possible. And in his shows, he obviously was pushing the limits of what was real and not, but he would surround it with such technical jargon and beakers and test tubes. And, in the 70s, every wall was like computer lights blinking, in these rooms. When you see shows or films like that, do you cringe, or do you appreciate what they're trying to do with giving it a foundation of science, but obviously going beyond into the science fiction?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I love those types. I mean, when I was a kid, the Incredible Hulk was actually my favorite show. And yeah,
Oh
loved,
boy,
yeah,
that's a whole
Greatest show
separate
ever.
podcast now. Yeah, you and Jeremy are gonna have a separate podcast about that one. I'm not involved with that one.
Okay. Yeah, we could talk.
That's one scientist I do not want to get angry, by the way.
Yeah, we wouldn't like you when you're angry, just like the
That's
Hulk.
right.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I love those types of shows and those types of movies. I mean, some people say, well, you're allowed sort of one made up thing in your movie. You can get away with that, and if the rest of it's accurate, then that's okay. I mean, I think that's fine. I think the idea is that you want to tell a good story, an interesting story, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, as with the Incredible Hulk, right? You're never going to make that, totally accurate. You have to go with the idea that this human turns into this gigantic green, invincible beast. But you're doing that because you want to tell a story about, repressed anger or heroism and the sort of hero in all of us, all that sort of stuff. And you can only
The
do
inner
that
strength that we all have, but few of us can tap into.
Yeah, exactly. And you can only do that when you have that type of fiction that you're willing to buy into. And so I never get unhappy, if people are making up science in order to tell a really good story. Now, of course, there are times where you don't want people to make up science in ways that can be dangerous, like things like medicine, things having to do with genetics, anything like that. You don't want people thinking that might be real. But yeah, in general, I was told, when I was interviewing a scientist about a film where they had to send a manned mission, to do something with the sun, and the scientist just kept telling them, this is unrealistic. Why would you send a manned mission? Just send a drones. You don't need to. And the filmmakers finally told them, well, look, that's the story, right? That's the human element, that we need that thing to happen. And that's true for a lot of the stories that are told, right? It requires a human element, or it might require something to be, totally inaccurate, but that's needed to make the story dramatic or interesting, or, to bring the audience in emotionally.
Right, because sometimes when you make the science too accurate, it doesn't make for good cinema. I know you wrote about the Andromeda Strain, and that these micrometers that they're going up, in increments at a time, it can be a little slow and arduous for an audience, even though it is real.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I talk to people, creators and producers for forensic television shows for another project, and yeah, the time factor, you have to, you don't want the audience bored, and so you have to, in some cases, ignore the science to move things along, or science itself can, if you're watching it, can be kind of boring. So yeah, you need things to make it exciting, for the audience. They're not there to learn science, even if they might learn some science or get interested in the science. They're there to be entertained.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up excellent points. When we first worked on on I guess the biggest project at the time with Marvel was Iron Man 2, and we got an opportunity to work on Tony Stark's tech. And when we were designing it, we were coming up with some very futuristic designs. And Jon Favreau and the team at Marvel were like, well, let's not make this 10 years into the future. Let's make it like 5. So it's believable, and people think like, oh, wow, that could actually work. So we've kept that, bit of knowledge in the back of our brains for every single project now moving forward with them. And it's worked out really well, because that's actually what attracts the technology companies to us, because they'll see it and be like, we're actually working on something like that. And we'd like for you guys to help us make it look just as cool as Tony Stark's tech. So it's something that I think really, well, it definitely attracts, all different types of clients, but, made a big impact on the way we think, and when we're working on these projects. So are there any specific scientists or science advisors that you think have had a particularly big impact in the way science is portrayed in movies?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the guy who worked on Jurassic Park, Jack Horner, again, I always think of a sort of pre-Jurassic Park, post-Jurassic Park era. He did a lot of work on the film, trying to make those dinosaurs realistic, but also there was a lot of media coverage surrounding it as well, sort of making people understand that this scientist was involved in making these different types of things. There's also a scientist called John Underkoffler who worked on Minority Report.
Yep.
And Minority Report itself, I think, is a sort of was a major sort of breakthrough for the ways in which scientists were used on movies, but also, like you were saying, the ways in which technologies were portrayed. I mean, as humans, it's hard for us to imagine the future, right? And so, if you say something's 50 years in the future, it's still going to look like today for us. Maybe just some jetpacks or something. So yeah, Minority Report, they had to stick with things that were related to contemporary technologies because anything more than 15 years and people aren't going to be able to relate to the way it is. But
if
John
Underkoffler, if it's not grounded in some kind of scientific or technological facts, then you lose the audience. It has to have something that people can grasp and then move a little bit beyond that into the science fiction.
Yeah, exactly. So like the stuff I've seen that you guys have done for the Marvel films, right? It's stuff that people have seen a little bit, but then it moves to that next level where, it looks like the future, right? But a believable future because we've seen something like it. But now just take it a couple years into the future. Yeah, so Minority Report for sure. And John Underkoffler. But also I'd say Interstellar, because it was, one scientist's sort of vision, he actually pushed for people to make that particular movie. And it, was based around his scientific theories. So again, there was that. And The Martian as well. James Green from NASA was sort of the main science consultant, but they brought a lot of people from NASA on board with it. And it was one of the, NASA's worked on a lot of films, but the thing about The Martian is that they were pushing what they thought NASA missions should be, right? I mean, it really was a glorification of NASA. And the mission, wasn't to save humanity or to do anything. It was a scientific mission that they went on, and that they really liked that.
We love the age-old notion that science fiction inspires science fact, and all the classic literature like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells inspiring inventors of the submarine and the rocket ship, respectively. And then, of course, the Star Trek communicator device in the 60s inspiring the flip phone, and 2001: A Space Odyssey, you see the first iPad. How do you feel about the role of film and science fiction films inspiring future technologies and science?
Yeah, I mean, the science fiction films, what I like is that they can sort of stimulate desire, right? They can put technology into a context so that people can say, I want that, right? They can see the utility of it, the use of it. And they can say, how can we make that happen? And one of the things in my book that I, did was to look at scientists who worked on films specifically to try and generate this type of desire. So I came up with a term I call diegetic prototype. Diegetic, that's just the film scholars' word for the fictional world. So it's a prototype within the fictional world, but it's a special prototype, right? Unlike your average old, physical prototype, it works, without any problems. People are using it in that fictional world, and you can see what they might be using it for.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's inspiring not just because it looks cool because of the form factor, but actually it serves a purpose with the characters in a particular scene who have a particular problem that this technology or this science can actually help address.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I also refer to them as pre-product placements, right?
Hmm.
So we know what a product placement is. You put your can of Coke in there, and hopefully the audience gives them the desire. Oh yeah, I want some Coca-Cola. But for the pre-product placement, right, the only way to get that product is if someone develops that technology. And so they have to support its development to get their, well, gestural interface or whatever the technology might be. I mean, one of my favorite of these diegetic prototypes is actually from the movie Big Hero 6,
Hmm.
right? So Baymax, he's a diegetic prototype, right? The roboticist who worked on the film, wanted people to desire having a soft medical personal care robot. And so now there's a Make Baymax Real website that the scientists have to try and get the money to make
Crazy.
Baymax real. Yeah,
It's growing up with Kit and Knight Rider, and imagine a car that could drive
yeah,
itself and talk to you
yeah,
with an
exactly.
AI. Like what? How crazy is that in 1980 whatever? And
Yeah,
now
yeah,
it's more than possible. It's happening and it's here.
yeah. Or an Iron Man suit.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Too bad they don't make the Firebird anymore because it's still a cool car. That's what Knight Rider
That's true.
was, or I should say what Kit was anyway. Trans Am Firebird. Gotta love those old cars.
Yeah.
So what do you think was the most accurate or realistic portrayal of science that you've seen in a movie? Do you have like one particular one? You mentioned a bunch, but I'm just curious if there's one that's like was really, really well done for you.
Yeah, I mean, I like I said, the sort of space ones, but one that is sort of off the beaten path, as it were, that I really liked, mainly because my PhD was in a similar type of thing, was a Darren Aronofsky film called The Fountain.
Hmm.
So The Fountain, it
Hugh
had sort of
Jackman,
three,
right?
yeah, Hugh Jackman.
Yep.
It had three parts, right? And in one part, he was a sort of conquistador looking for the fountain of youth. In the second part, he was a geneticist trying to find a cure for cancer. And the third, crazy part, he's kind of a man in the future living in a bubble. I can't explain that. Actually, people either love or hate the film. I actually really love the film. But it's that second part where he's a geneticist, a molecular biologist trying to find the cure for cancer. It was amazingly well done. The lab sets were so realistic, the way the scientists talked to each other, even the ways they were looking in their microscope and what they were showing. Um, yeah, I just found it to be an excellent example of sort of how lab culture can work as well. And it wasn't something you would expect in a film from Darren Aronofsky. Basically, a film about trying to find immortality or overcome death.
What about the ethical questions and hypothetical scenarios that you discuss? There's some examples of that and why science fiction is well suited for those types of discussions.
Yeah, I mean, science fiction. Yeah, by essentially setting it in a particular social context, right? You can get the characters talking about what might be the unforeseen consequences of a particular technology or a particular use of science. So, science fiction you often refer to as speculative fiction. And so through those different types of speculations, right, you can explore some things that you couldn't necessarily explore in the real world, or maybe we have a real world experiment, but we don't want to go down that route. We'd
Hmm.
rather see what the potential consequences are first before we can do that. And science fiction definitely allows us to do that sort of experimentation at a story level. And if it's done well, right, if you've got someone who's willing to, think through all the particular types of consequences, right, you can really do a great job of laying out there what some of the ethical consequences might be, either of a science or a technology.
So I'm gonna share a story with you about when I watch movies as a visual effects artist and just owning a studio, sometimes it ruins it for me when I'm watching it because I'm like, oh man, the composite or the tracking's off or whatever it might be. So a long time ago, you guys probably remember the movie called Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yep.
And he's trying to get his daughter back with, I think, Melissa Milano, if I'm not mistaken. And there's this car chase, and he's in this Porsche, and he's smashing against the mountains, and all this stuff's happening. And he basically holds this guy over a cliff and asks him questions, and he lets him go. And then he goes back to the Porsche, and it's the Porsche. It's an old 911. It's on its side. And, he's huge. So he pushes it over, and he's about to drive away in it. And as soon as he drives away, the Porsche is in perfect condition, even though 2 seconds ago it was completely smashed and, riddled with dents. Is there something like, is there a big misconception, or is there something in movies that you've watched, or one in particular you're like, oh man, that could never happen, or that was a mistake, they shouldn't have let that one go through?
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it's the 10% of your brain myth, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea that we only use 10% of our brains is one that I find really, really problematic. And mainly because you don't need it often when these particular stories are told. Lucy, the Luc Besson film, is kind of one of the worst examples. But I also think, I use this when I'm teaching about sort of using science in stories. So there was a movie that came out called Limitless, right? With Bradley Cooper.
Bradley Cooper,
in it.
Yeah. NZT was the drug.
Still looking for that pill.
Yeah.
Where I can get it, let me know.
And so, he's in the diner, and his former brother-in-law, or the brother of his ex-girlfriend, I can't remember what, gives him the pill, right? And says, hey, if you we don't use 10%, we only use 10% of our brain. This lets you use all of your brain. And Bradley Cooper's like, well, how does it do that? And the guy's like, well, I don't know, it just does it. And I always tell my students, I'm like, well, did you even need that then? Right? I mean, the guy's a drug dealer. He should just say, hey, this thing makes you super smart. How does it work? I don't know. I'm a drug dealer. You don't need to throw in that misconception in order for the story to move on. And the 10% thing never even comes back, right? So that particular misconception is one that I find very problematic.
You write about how science and movies can inspire people to pursue careers in science, and we've worked on both Black Panther films, and there's a lot of stories of how Shuri in Wakanda is inspiring young girls to get into STEM careers. Could you talk more about this and share any personal stories or examples?
Yeah, certainly. There's a organization called the Gina Davis Foundation that you might be familiar with. That Gina Davis, the actor, started this foundation to try and make it so that young girls can see different careers on screen in order to sort of pursue them. And she's focused quite a bit on the STEM sort of careers. And their motto is, if she can see it, she can be it. Right. And this is definitely something that is true for science fiction films. Prior to the 1990s, you didn't see very many female scientists at all, right? So of course, girls aren't going to want to become scientists if they're going to have to, look like Doc Brown, with his frizzy hair, type of thing. That's not going to be appealing to them. But nowadays, you'll find lots of female scientists in movies that can give, the girls a sense that, yeah, it's good to be like Amy Adams in Arrival, or Sandra Bullock in Gravity, or even in Interstellar, right? Matthew McConaughey is not actually a scientist; he's just a pilot. It's his daughter who is the scientist in the film. So there is a lot of research, showing that when girls can see, not just that girls can do science, but that the girls doing the science, or the women doing the science, are, average people. They're not, crazy, weird, frizzy haired, glasses wearing, lab coat, besotted people. They're just people that can make them want to go into science, or at least see science as a viable career. And we'll not forget engineering as well.
But you also discuss how science in movies can be used as a tool for political messaging or propaganda. Can you talk more about this and give us some examples?
Yeah. So because storytelling is so powerful, I was interested in, when I started writing the book, I was interested in sort of what motivated scientists to work on movies. And I found a lot of scientists were motivated to work on movies because they felt a particular issue, required either more scientific attention or more political attention or required more funding. And so they became involved because they wanted to create stories that would, sort of scare the public into supporting what it is that they were concerned about. And I refer to this as the War Games effect, right? After the 1983 film, the idea is,
We
to
use the code
present.
named Whopper for a lot of things here from that movie.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great film, and
Yep.
the message is, hey, we need to pay attention to to the ways in which we're dealing with our artificial intelligence in order to prevent future disaster. So movies like, well, being one, Outbreak before that, or Twister, The Day After Tomorrow, right? The scientists working on those films were trying to sort of warn humanity, look what can happen if we don't pay attention to this issue. I like to think of it as they're working as the ghost of Christmas future, right? Like in the Dickens novel, Christmas Carol. So the idea is, I'm going to show you a horrible future, but I'm also going to tell you that you have the capacity to stop that future from becoming a real possibility if you act now, right? If you pay attention to emerging viruses or the threat of global warming or whatever the case might be. So yeah, a lot of scientists saw this as a sort of great opportunity to tell a story that might frighten people into taking action.
David, I just want to tell you how much I enjoyed your book, Lab Coats in Hollywood. I stumbled on it actually pretty recently when I was putting together a presentation, but your expertise and your subject matter is so near and dear to our hearts. It's just a pleasure talking to you. What do you hope readers take away from your book, and what impact do you hope it will have on the way people think about science and cinema?
Yeah, so I usually have sort of two things that I'm hoping people take away from it. One is that scientists working on these films can make an impact, right? They can help filmmakers to tell a better story using science, right? That they're not there to be the sort of science police to keep telling the filmmakers no. They're there to help the filmmakers utilize science in telling a better story. But the second thing is also to understand that, well, scientists are scientific experts, but filmmakers, they're what I call entertainment experts, right? So there are reasons why, films can't be 100% accurate all the time. There's always going to be constraints, and the filmmakers know what these constraints are. And certainly some filmmakers, like a Steven Spielberg or James Cameron, they're willing to put a lot of work in to try and overcome those constraints. But there are other potential, other filmmakers who, may not be willing to put that sort of work in and not want to try and overcome certain constraints. But yeah, so those are the two things. Scientists can help make films good by using science, but also we can't expect the films to be 100% accurate because there are always filmmaking constraints.
So how do you see the relationship between science and cinema evolving in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. I see it continuing to be sort of symbiotic. And, I think that, well, there's an organization called the Science and Entertainment Exchange run by the National Academy of Sciences that has grown over the last 10 years. They're getting a lot of scientists involved in making movies and TV shows and computer games. And I think it's getting more symbiotic because filmmakers realize, that working with scientists is it's not a bad thing.
Yeah,
And
I'll just interrupt. Marvel has worked with that group before. They've mentioned it to us. And we actually interviewed Brian Greene, who's a professor at Columbia, math and physics, and he was a consultant on Ant-Man and the quantum
Oh,
realm.
oh yeah, yeah. They've yeah. I mean, as you guys know, I mean, Marvel has been from the beginning, wanting their films to have scientific grounding. I think
Yep.
it's sort of amazing, given that a lot of those comic book heroes, their origins have a sort of supernatural element, a mystical element.
Yeah, it
Uh,
seems like half of them are cosmic or supernatural, but the other half are born in a lab, like
yeah,
David Banner, like Wolverine or Iron Man. There is a lot of them that are scientifically or scientist based.
yeah. But with the movies, Doctor Strange and Thor, they've made them
Yeah,
scientific, right? They've given them a
yeah,
scientific sort of
Mhm.
explanation, which I think is great. It grounds everything in a realism that people can attach themselves to, even if we know again that you can never really have a Hulk, or there's no Thor living on some distant planet. At least you could sort of buy into it during the time it is that you're sitting in the seat watching those films, and that's sort of yeah, that's what you want. And so when you have the case of science comic book films really digging hard into the science, yeah, I think it's sort of here to stay, that synergy between science and cinema.
This famous line, sorry, from Thor when he's speaking to I can't remember her name now. The actress, his
Yeah, Natalie
girlfriend, plays
Portman.
his
Yeah,
girlfriend. Thank you, thank you. It says your ancestors called it magic, but you call it science. I come from
yeah,
a land where they are one and the same. That's one of our favorite lines. We use that quite a
yeah.
bit.
So I just was going to wrap up, David, with asking you what you're currently working on and what can readers expect from you in the future.
Yeah, good. So at the moment, I'm working on a book that it seems really different from Lab Coats in Hollywood, but it's actually an extension. So with Lab Coats in Hollywood, again, one of the things I was interested in, I'm interested in this idea of the stories we tell about science and technology, and then how those stories can impact real world science and technology. And so, who controls these stories, and why do they want to control these stories? I shouldn't even say control, influence the stories told about science and technology. And I was doing some work at some point and ran across a story about movie censorship. So in America from 1930 to 1968, all movies were censored. They were sent to something called the Hays Office. And the people at the Hays Office would look at the movie and determine, whether or not changes needed to be made before it could be made into a film. And they normally, the things most people hear about when they hear about that type of censorship is sex, violence, language. But the story I ran across was one having to do with evolution. And I began to think about, well, clearly they thought of other things than just sex, violence, and language. And so I'm looking at how these censors approach science and technology. And so, again, how are they trying to control the stories told about science in movies? Which stories didn't they want told, right? Or which stories did they want told? What stories about science did they actually like that they wanted out there? So, yeah, I'm working on a book. It's called Indecent Science, Science, Religion, and Movie Censorship.
Sounds awesome. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, David. It was a real pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks. It's great. Yeah, I love the work that you guys are doing with the Marvel film. So it's great for me to talk to you.
Awesome. Thanks again.
And that wraps up another episode of the Perception Podcast. As always, send any questions and comments to ask@experienceperception.com. Make sure you follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube channel.
Sign up for our weekly newsletter on our site, experienceperception.com/contact. Lastly, if you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes and write a nice review. See you on the next episode.